Luke Carter, a 38-year-old architect, was the kind of man who found comfort in precision. Known for his innovative designs and meticulous attention to detail, his work had earned him accolades and respect in his field. But while his career soared, his personal life remained strictly compartmentalized, untouched by the chaos of emotions and relationships. Luke's office, perched high in a downtown skyscraper, was a reflection of his personality, sleek, modern, and devoid of clutter. As he reviewed blueprints for his latest project, the intercom buzzed, breaking his concentration. "Mr. Carter," Kelly, his assistant, said hesitantly, "there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists it's urgent." Luke frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "You know my policy on unannounced visitors, Kelly." "I do, sir," she replied, her tone uneasy. "But she says her name is Julia Reyes, and it's personal." The name struck a faint chord in Luke's memory, but he couldn't place it. After a pause, he relented. "Fine. Give me 5 minutes, then send her in." Luke returned to his blueprints, brushing off the intrusion as a temporary inconvenience. Little did he know, his life was about to be upended in ways he could never have predicted. When the office door opened, Luke didn't look up immediately. Maintaining control in unexpected situations was second nature to him, and he had no intention of giving this Julia Reyes the upper hand. "Mr. Carter," a woman's voice said, steady but tinged with tension, "thank you for seeing me." Luke finally raised his eyes and froze. Julia Reyes stood before him, looking both familiar and unfamiliar. Her dark hair was shorter than he remembered, her face sharper, more serious. But there was no mistaking her. 7 years ago, their paths had crossed briefly, fleetingly, during a conference in Chicago. "Julia," he said neutrally, leaning back in his chair, "this is unexpected." "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't absolutely necessary," she replied, still standing, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Then you'd better tell me why you're here." Julia hesitated, then took a deep breath. "That night we spent together in Chicago, I got pregnant." The words hit Luke like a blow, though he kept his face impassive. "I see," he said carefully, though his mind raced. Julia's voice cracked slightly as she continued. "I have a daughter. Her name is Luna, and she's 6 years old. And I need your help." Luke's grip on the edge of his desk tightened. "Help with what, exactly?" "I need you to take her," Julia said, her composure slipping. "I've lost everything, my job, my savings, my home. I can barely provide for myself, let alone for her." Luke stared at her, his mind calculating scenarios, implications, outcomes. But beneath the logical noise, a faint, unfamiliar feeling began to stir. Luke Carter prided himself on his ability to stay grounded, no matter how chaotic the situation. But as Julia handed him a folder containing documents, including a birth certificate with his name listed under father, that calm exterior began to crack. "I have everything ready for a DNA test," Julia said, her voice steady but layered with urgency. "You can choose the lab, the doctor, anything to put your mind at ease." Luke nodded curtly. "I'll handle it." Though he kept his tone neutral, doubt gnawed at him. He needed more than her words. He needed proof, the kind that couldn't be refuted. The next morning, Luke arranged for the test at a clinic of his choosing, keeping Julia informed. He told himself it was just another problem to solve, but the wait for results proved excruciating. Days passed, and Luke found himself replaying fragments of that night in Chicago. Could it be true? The results arrived on a Thursday morning. Luke stared at the email, his heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. 99.99% probability of paternity. The conclusion was inescapable. Luna was his daughter. Later that evening, Julia brought Luna to his penthouse. When the elevator doors opened, Luke found himself face to face with a little girl who looked unnervingly familiar. Luna stood holding Julia's hand, her dark curls framing a curious face that mirrored his own in more ways than he cared to admit. "Hi," Luna said softly, her voice steady despite her shyness. "Hi, Luna." Luke replied, his voice gentler than he expected. He hesitated. I'm Luke. You're my dad, Luna stated, more as a fact than a question. Luke glanced at Julia, who nodded slightly, her eyes filled with cautious hope. Come in, he said, stepping aside. Inside, Luna's wide eyes wandered over the minimalist furniture and towering windows. Your house is really big, she said. Thank you, Luke said awkwardly. Would you like something to drink? I have juice. Apple juice? She asked, perking up. Yes, apple juice. He went to the kitchen, giving himself a moment to breathe. When he returned with a juice box, Luna smiled brightly. Thank you, Dad, she said, the word catching him off guard. Luke's throat tightened, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through him. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about logistics or DNA. It was about a little girl who had no idea how much she was about to change his life. The following week was unlike anything Luke Carter had ever experienced. Julia, desperate for stability, asked him to take care of Luna temporarily while she looked for a new job and a permanent home. I'll only need a week, she promised, just until I get back on my feet. Luke hesitated. He was a man who thrived on control, on knowing the outcome of every decision. Taking care of a 6-year-old was entirely uncharted territory. But when he looked at Luna, wide-eyed and hopeful, he couldn't say no. Fine, he said finally. 1 week. The first morning was a disaster. Luke had no idea how to pack a school lunch or braid hair. Luna's questions came rapid fire. Where's my backpack? Do I need my library book? Can we have pancakes for breakfast? By the time he dropped her off at school, he was already exhausted. But as the days passed, Luke began to adjust. He learned Luna's favorite foods, her bedtime routine, and how to read her moods. She was bright and curious, asking endless questions about his work. One evening, she stood beside him at his drafting table, watching as he sketched a design. Can I try? She asked, holding out her hand for a pencil. Luke hesitated but handed it to her. Luna began drawing confidently, creating what she proudly declared was a house for unicorns. Luke couldn't help but smile. But the turning point came midweek when Luna had a severe asthma attack. It started with a small wheeze, but within minutes, she was struggling to breathe. Panicked, Luke called Julia, who immediately instructed him to take Luna to the emergency room. At the hospital, Julia arrived just as the doctors began treatment. Luke stood helplessly by, his usual calm shattered. Watching Luna struggle was unbearable. She'll be okay, Julia reassured him, though her own hands trembled. Hours later, as Luna slept soundly in her hospital bed, Luke sat beside her, his head in his hands. Guilt weighed heavily on him, intertwining with the growing resolve. I should have known, he murmured, his voice thick with regret. Julia placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. It was in the medical records, she said, her voice soft but strained. Her asthma's been under control for years. I didn't think... She broke off, taking a shaky breath. Luke looked at her, then at Luna. I can't keep doing this halfway. If I'm going to be in her life, I need to be all in. From that moment on, something shifted in Luke. He rearranged his work schedule to attend Luna's school events and started picking her up from school. He even learned to braid her hair, though his first few attempts were laughably uneven. For the first time in his life, Luke Carter's world wasn't defined by blueprints or deadlines. It was defined by the laughter of a little girl who was slowly teaching him what it meant to truly care for someone else. But just as Luke was beginning to find his rhythm as a father, the outside world intruded in a way he hadn't prepared for. The balance he'd carefully constructed began to tilt when an unexpected phone call shattered their peace. Luke's decision to fully embrace fatherhood marked a new chapter for him and for Julia. Though their relationship was still cautious, they began working together to provide Luna with the stability she deserved. The first major step was housing. Luke insisted on helping Julia find a permanent place to live. "I found an apartment close to her school," Luke said one evening, showing Julia the listing. "It's in a secure building and it has enough space for both of you." Julia hesitated, her pride warring with her need for stability. "I appreciate this, Luke, but I can't let you pay for everything. I need to do this on my own." "You can pay rent once you're back on your feet," Luke offered, his tone firm but understanding. "This isn't about us, Julia. It's about Luna." Reluctantly, Julia agreed, and within days she and Luna were settling into their new home. Seeing her daughter excitedly decorate her new bedroom brought tears to Julia's eyes. Meanwhile, Luke and Julia began to navigate co-parenting. They attended Luna's school events together, worked out shared routines, and even spent time as a family on weekends. One Saturday, they took Luna to the park, where she delighted in showing off her gymnastics moves. "Watch this, Dad," Luna called, attempting a wobbly cartwheel. Luke applauded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "You're amazing, kiddo." Later, as they sat on a picnic blanket, Luna looked up at her parents. "It's nice when we're all together," she said simply. Julia glanced at Luke, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared desire to give Luna the life she deserved. But the closeness also reignited old feelings. One evening, after putting Luna to bed, Luke and Julia found themselves lingering in the living room. "You've changed," Julia said softly. "So have you," Luke replied, his voice steady. They didn't say more, but the air between them felt charged, filled with possibilities they weren't quite ready to name. As the weeks turned into months, their bond deepened, not just as co-parents, but as two people rediscovering each other. Slowly, tentatively, they began to wonder if this unexpected journey could lead to more than just rebuilding their family. Just as Luke was settling into his new life as a father, an unexpected challenge threatened to unravel everything. Early one morning, Julia called Luke, her voice tense. "Have you seen the news?" "No," Luke replied, frowning as he opened his laptop. The headline hit him like a punch. "Renowned architect's hidden family, Luke Carter's secret daughter and former flame revealed." The article was filled with photos of him, Julia, and Luna at the park, accompanied by invasive speculation about their relationship and how it might affect Luke's career. By the time he arrived at his office, the fallout had already begun. His partners and clients were calling non-stop, questioning his judgment. During a tense meeting, one partner confronted him. "Luke, this is damaging our reputation. Investors are worried. You need to address this." Luke's jaw tightened. "I'll handle the media, but my daughter and her privacy are off limits. Do you understand me?" That evening, Luke found Julia pacing in her living room. Luna was in her room, thankfully unaware of the chaos outside. "This is why I didn't tell you before," Julia said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want her dragged into your world." "She's my world now," Luke replied firmly, "and I'll protect her, no matter what it takes." The media frenzy forced Luke to make a choice he had long avoided. After days of reflection and heated meetings, he called his partners together. "I'm stepping back," Luke announced, his voice calm but resolute. "I'll remain involved in strategic planning, but the day-to-day operations need a new lead." His colleagues were stunned. "Luke, are you sure about this?" one asked. "Yes," he replied firmly. "My priorities have changed. It's time I focus on what matters most." With the transition in motion, Luke turned his attention back to Julia and Luna. On the evening of Luna's school play, he and Julia sat side by side in the front row, their hands brushing as they clapped for Luna's performance. "You're smiling," Julia teased softly. "It's hard not to," Luke admitted, watching Luna beam on stage. After the play, as Luna ran off to celebrate with her friends, Luke led Julia to a quieter corner of the auditorium. "Julia," Luke said, his voice low but unwavering as he took her hands. "I've spent my entire career creating spaces that people call home. But the truth is, I didn't know what home really meant until now. You and Luna have shown me something I never thought I needed. You've changed everything." Tears glistened in Julia's eyes as Luke dropped to one knee. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Julia laughed through her tears. "Yes," she said, pulling him up into an embrace. Their wedding was small, intimate, and perfect. Luna proudly stood as their flower girl, scattering petals with dramatic flair. As Luke and Julia exchanged vows, they promised not only to love each other, but also to create a home filled with warmth, trust, and laughter for Luna. In the end, Luke realized his greatest achievement wasn't the career he had built, it was the family he had found. As he stood with Julia and Luna, surrounded by love and laughter, he knew this was only the beginning of their story, a story of second chances, growth, and the power of connection. If this heartfelt journey moved you as much as it moved us, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We bring you more stories like this, filled with emotion, inspiration, and the beauty of life's unexpected turns. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss an update. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Luke's story resonated with you the most? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.